Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Football League Weekly, our first show in absolutely ages, so many apologies if I am a bit rusty, but Rhys, I'm delighted to be here and I'm delighted to be talking to you as well. We haven't been on for quite a while, but what have you made of the championship since we were last on the air?
It's been absolutely fantastic. It's been far too long since we've been sat here talking about it. I think we were saying, sort of backstage, it's been about sort of 3 months, which feels insane. But the championship as a whole has been exciting. There's been drama. There's been everything you could really wish for from the season. We've got no idea out of 4 to 6 teams who's going to get promoted. You almost the whole bottom half of the table are really in some sort of danger of getting relegated as well. You just can't take your eye off this league. It's fantastic.
And there are a couple of teams, and we were speaking about this before we did go on air, a couple of teams who have surprised us as well. And we were talking about Blackburn Rovers and Birmingham as two examples. They play each other real soon. So to continue off on our conversation before we did go live on the air, these are two teams that are massively underperforming, aren't they?
Yeah, they are massively. I mean, let's take Birmingham first. The decision to sack John Eustace was, as I said before, was ludicrous. It just goes to show what can happen. It's the wrong managerial appointment in Wayne Rooney, which could easily go down as one of the worst the Championship's ever seen. Certainly the worst one in terms of what I've sort of seen myself when I've been following the Championship. Absolute mess. You got Blackburn, who I'm sure we're going to in a second, the whole transfer saga around Duncan Maguire and flying him over here to then go back, to then come back on loan, to then it's an absolute mess. Goodness knows where he was.
And good evening to everybody else in the chat as well. Good evening to Ballum. Lovely to see you here. So, John Dahl Thompson has had his resignation accepted by Benke's. He will move swiftly to replace him. John Eustace is currently favourites to succeed him. Firstly, John Dahl Thompson, he's done a brilliant job, in my opinion, at Blackburn. Got them into the playoff picture 2 years running. What do you make of him resigning? Because I reckon it's more of an ownership issue, really, than a John Dahl Thompson issue.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues here with Blackburn, both sort of managerial and ownership wise. I think there's a lot of similarities between the situation there and the situation at Cardiff with Aaron Bullitt as well. Both managers are very frustrated by the lack of sort of the sort of transfer budget, if you like, in order to sort of bring players in. Blackburn, especially, they needed reinforcements. They haven't gone out and done so, or brought in the quality perhaps that they should have needed to. But this is an appointment that they have to get right. And if John Eustace comes through, then that for me is a sensational appointment. It really is, because we saw with his time at Birmingham exactly what he is capable of doing.
So just 5 points from their last 11 games. And we were talking about this before we went on to the air, that whoever loses that next game, Blackburn versus Birmingham, could potentially be in a relegation battle or the relegation picture, to say the least. Do you have any faith that Blackburn can get the next appointment right?
My faith is quite low, if I'm being perfectly honest. I'm surprised they're stuck with the ownership that they have, to be honest with you, as well. If they bring in, the thing is that it's a lot of ifs, but it's a couple of maybes as well. It's if they can bring in John Eustace, which to me is the man that they should be going for, then 100%, we could see him really sort of turn around if they get that done by the time that they face Birmingham as well. They win that game, they rock up the league, and this is the one and only time we talk about them potentially being in a relegation fight. But of course, the flip side of that, they get this next appointment wrong. They don't get the points that they need to against Birmingham. And then suddenly we're talking about them being genuine contenders to actually go down. So we were saying the QPR are starting to pick up points now. We both can't see them being down there sort of in April and May. So there is 4, 5, maybe even 6 teams that could be dragged into this.
So a good comment right here from Balam. Some people will be surprised Blackburn still have Indian owners. They once went down to League One. So the Venkies, they were very unpopular a couple of years ago, and so much so that there were protests against them. Are you surprised that they've lasted this long at Ewood Park, especially considering their reputation?
Yeah, I am, to be honest. But very rarely now. I mean, I know we're going to focus mainly on the Championship tonight, but you look into sort of like clubs like Reading as well. It takes a lot for an owner to sort of step away and go, you know what, I'm sort of done in a way. You're almost waiting on that prospective buyer to be ready and to sort of take over sort of straight away. So I'm not too surprised they're still there, but they need to go for me. You're on mute, mate.
I do that every show, don't I? You know we're back when I put myself on mute, but it's a real shame to see that happening. And Blackburn have been in the wars a bit off the pitch as well. We'll talk about the transfers in a bit more detail later on. But Duncan Maguire was slated to join them from Orlando City FC. They had even made the announcement about him that he was joining the club. That somehow fell through. So do you reckon that had any impact on John Dahl Thompson's decision to leave the club?
Potentially, but I think that whole sort of transfer saga really sums up well what's going on with Blackburn at the moment. The EFL came out, made a statement about 10 minutes before it went live and said that the document that should have been submitted, the admin only pressed save and didn't press submit. And it's like that's a schoolboy error. That's ridiculous. And if that's the sort of standards that these ownerships are holding themselves to, then it's just not good enough.
And let's move on to some of the other news before we do move on to the transfers. Don't forget you can ask your questions live on YouTube. Sorry, I almost said Twitter, but live on YouTube. If you are watching over on Twitter, then hop on over to YouTube to get involved in the show. And good evening to everybody else in the chat as well. So this is maybe something that we should maybe leave till the end of the show, but I'll talk about it now. Cian Harratt has been given a 4-month ban for breaching FA betting rules. Now, this is a real debate to be had because I reckon the FA should really take some responsibility for how they've kind of like endorsed betting in the past. The FA are the same association that reprimand players. They are the same people that kind of like endorse betting as well. And I reckon there needs to be a fundamental change. But what do you make of this? Because first of all, Cian Harratt getting banned, how big an impact could that have on Huddersfield's season? And what do you make of the current betting legislations in the FA or in English football at the moment?
Well, let's take his impact at Huddersfield first. Their team that themselves are now being dragged into this relegation battle, and to lose any player, let alone an important one for the rest of the season, is a massive, massive loss. I mean, you talk about the sort of the effects that this betting's having, but you're seeing betting on sort of sponsors on shirts. You're seeing it on advertisement boards around the edge of the pitches. You watch football on your TV. It's advert after advert for betting company, betting company, betting company. Can we really sit here and say we're surprised? I don't think we can. It's too easy now to go on to. I'm a victim of this as well, so I can't talk like I don't do it. To go on your phone and put a couple of quid bet on, put a tenner on, it's just too easy. Let's be honest. And when you're sitting back and all you're seeing is advertisements for Bet365 for Ladbrokes, these players are only human beings too, aren't they? It's too easy.
Yeah, and the problem that I have is that, like I've betted in the past as well. And as you said, it's so easy, just kind of like put £5 here, maybe put a tenner down there. But, like if you're a player, you're surrounded by betting advertising, which is absolutely shocking, really. And when you watch TV, like say, for example, Sky Television, every ad break is usually consumed by these betting adverts. And in my opinion, like it's backwards. Surely there's some other way for the FA to make revenue, to kind of like build revenue instead of like relying too heavily on these kind of like betting sponsorships. I know for a fact that in America, they have tighter rules in regards to betting, and it's only recently been legalized for them to put down certain kind of like sport bets, if that makes sense. I'm no expert. You'll probably have to read on it. Finally, on this subject, do you reckon they should be more lenient in regards to punishment for players? Because in my opinion, banning players for 4 months for betting is kind of a backwards way of doing it, really. Surely you should be offering them support and not banning them.
110%. It's the same for whoever commits any crime anywhere. The support and the rehab facility has to be there, because if not, you're banning them. But then if you're not helping them psychologically, they're just going to go and do it again and again and again. And I think it was someone in a sort of chat mentioned not even Tony. Absolutely perfect example about it as well. We've seen him sort of fall out, and thankfully now he's come back, and let's hope that he sort of stays in the good books now. But even the championship itself and League One Two is sponsored by Sky Bet. You're seeing these advertisements absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, and it's a real shame to see. And as Ballum says, betting sponsors need to go. As you say, Benny Boy, changed my nickname down there, as you might be able to see. But yeah, it's a real debate to be had. We'll keep you updated, because I'm sure many more players will be getting bans in the coming year because of it. Because, like we saw with Sandro Tonali, where he got banned because of betting, he had a hefty ban as well. And I'm sure a lot more are to come as well. We are now going to move on to the January transfer window. Plenty has happened since we were last on the air, obviously. First of all, which club, Rhys, do you reckon has had the best transfer window?
Without a shadow of a doubt, it has to be Hull City, don't it? The level of player, the sort of caliber that they've been able to bring in as well is simply sensational. The likes of Fabio Carvalho. I mean, the pull that Liam Rossini must have, and the backroom staff, and the ownership, and the coaches must be incredible. Because if you're bringing players of this caliber, it's simply sensational. And now you look at their attacking options, the likes of Jaden Philogene, the Tyler Moore, and you look at Billy Sharp. So you're getting a really, really good mix now of youth and experience. And for me, they're a team that now simply will finish in that top six, and there's too much quality not to.
I agree, and it's been an absolutely spectacular transfer window, and Fabio Carvalho as well. He's a bit of a coup, really. I'm surprised that they managed to get him in. If they get him firing on all cylinders, and he'll be an absolutely brilliant asset for them. Do you reckon Hull are potential playoff contenders, because they're lingering there and thereabouts at the moment in the playoffs? Do you reckon they're contenders?
Yeah, I'd say they are 100%. I know we're going on to this in more detail in a second, but I think the top four is the top four. I'm not saying it'll finish in that particular order, but those teams are just sort of will be your top four in some sort of order anyway. So really, the likes of West Brom, Hull, Coventry, Sunderland, even I can't even say this, Norwich, are even fighting for sort of fifth and sixth, and that's really the only two positions that you've got. So Hull are definitely a contender, yeah.
And I think Liam Rosinia deserves a lot of the plaudits as well, because Premier League clubs obviously trust him with their young players, and that has allowed him to bring in the likes of Carvalho, Delap, Zahore as well, who I'm absolutely amazed that they've managed to bring him in. So I reckon Hull are on the up, and as I just said, Rosinia is a brilliant manager. I'm so happy to see how he's done there, because I thought he was a good manager at Derby. I thought he had plenty of potential, and obviously he's shining right now. Elsewhere, a couple of other clubs who've had really good transfer windows. We're going to talk about Ipswich. So, Ipswich needed to fill in a couple of positions in January, specifically a new centre-back that they failed to bring a new one in for, and a new striker as well. But they brought in Kiefer Moore. What did you make of their transfer window?
Without being too biased, and perhaps the chat can tell me I'm wrong, I think we've probably had the second best transfer window. Obviously Hull being first, I think that we're second in that respect. I really do. I mean, when we lost George Hurst due to injury, you could see that the likes of Caden Jackson and Nathan Broadhead just weren't the same caliber. We were being sort of caged in. We had no outlook going forward, and we've really struggled. We have really struggled. And now I know it's only been one half of football that Kiefer Moore has actually played for us, but within that half of football, we had that outlook. We had that big striker. He went and grabbed a brace, of course, as well. And we brought in Ali Al-Hamadi, who probably for me is the biggest sort of young prospect outside of the Premier League. He's absolutely sensational. And then you sort of counteracting that with lots of Lewis Travers, who was the captain at Blackburn Rovers, of course. So to bring him in on loan to the end of the season is an incredible sign as well. That gives us that sort of that leadership that you get when Sam Morsey will get suspended. We all know he's going to rack up more and more yellow cards. So you get that sort of captain-like figure as well. And then you're bringing in a fantastic winger in Jeremy Sarmiento, again on loan, who offers you that little bit more as well. So I think it's been a great window. Yes, you're looking at the potential for another centre-back. Personally, I didn't see that 100% as an area we needed to go for, but I would see the argument for it.
So given Edmondson's shaky performance last weekend, do you reckon that maybe there could be an argument to be had about Ipswich needing to bring in a new centre-back?
I can see the argument for it 110%. But I think when you've got Cameron Burgess, who may or may not be back for the game against West Brom, depends on flights and everything like that, of course. You've got Luke Orfenden, George Edmondson, Axel Twanzebe. You're then looking at likes of Elkin Baggott, who's a sort of young up-and-coming centre-back as well. I think if you bring in another senior centre-back, you're blocking that way for Baggott. And for me, yes, okay, he's not a world beater. He's not going to come into the Championship next season, start all 46 and be Player of the Year. We're not saying that. But he's definitely good enough to be a backup.
And Ian Bradley, he says Moore is an upgrade on Ladapo. And yes, I agree. Like Ladapo is a very similar player to what we want, but I don't really think he had the killer instinct. And there's always been that conversation regarding his mentality that I've heard bandied about here and there. And I've never seen it myself, but I don't think he was necessarily a player who we could rely on if we wanted to, I say we, exposing obviously that I'm an Ipswich fan. But I don't think he was a player that Ipswich really needed if they wanted to kind of challenge for the Premier League. And again, good evening to everybody else in the chat as well. A good conversation going on at the moment in regards to betting. We will discuss it in a bit more detail at the end of the show. So thank you very much to everybody who has gotten involved tonight. A team that I do want to touch upon, and a team who, in my opinion, had arguably a very good transfer window, a transfer window that could potentially save their season if it isn't already too late, is Sheffield Wednesday. They're a team who didn't sign any players during the summer transfer window. They started the season really light, and I think that was very obvious indeed. And Sheffield Wednesday have brought in Ian Pavida, James Speedle, and Ike Ugbo. 3 very late signings were signed on transfer deadline day. These 3 players were absolutely needed, in my opinion, Rhys. What do you make of those signings?
Yeah, I think they're good signings. They're definitely solid. I don't know if I'll rely on Ugbo, to be honest, to score loads of goals. He's never been too prolific, so I wouldn't say I'd be relying on him to sort of save their season by any stretch. But what I like about sort of the setup at Wednesday at the moment is that you've got a manager in Danny Rule who really you've got to stick by. We said in the sort of preview show, or maybe a couple of weeks after the preview show, this was going to be a tough season for Wednesday, regardless of what happened. And they had to stick with Danny Rowe. So regardless if they go down the season, which personally I think they will, to be honest, if I've got to make a call now, I think they will go down. I think the gaps is just too much to try to recoup. But that's stick with Danny Rowe.
Yeah, Danny Role, he's been a manager who I've been really impressed with. And regardless if Sheffield Wednesday go down or not, I reckon Chanziri has to keep him. Because personally, I don't see Chanziri leaving in the near future. He's another one of those stubborn owners who refuses to leave their club. And I reckon he's a manager, as I just said, who they have to keep hold of. But yeah, I reckon they've had a pretty decent transfer window when putting things into perspective. when putting their financial situation into perspective, the fact that they've managed to sign 3 players is actually quite impressive anyway. James Beadle is a decent player. Ian Pavida, haven't seen much of him, but I've heard good things about him. And Ike Ugbo, look, he's hit or miss. He could possibly do well for them, but he's a player who they do need as well. And a team who have had a really poor transfer window, in my opinion, are Sunderland. They've let go of one of their most important players, 30-year-old Alex Pritchard, who had seemingly fallen out with management. What do you make of Sunderland's transfer window? Okay, they signed 3 players, but they let go of a crucial player in Alex Pritchard. So what do you make of that, Rhys?
Yeah, seeing him go, I can't say I was too surprised, to be honest. We all know that the relationship they had with Mowbray. I think we were expecting it as well, to be honest, he was going to go. They have brought in some decent players, to be fair, and they are one of the teams sort of competing for said 5th or 6th position. I just don't think they got it, to be honest.
But do you reckon there was almost a mistake in letting him go on a free? Because I know that his contract does expire soon, but surely they could have cashed in and got something for him.
Yeah, they could have 100%. It almost sounded like from the reports online, they forced his way out, didn't he? He just he refused to make himself available. I don't know if that has any implications on whether you can get a fee for him, but surely it's better to even get minimal than nothing.
Exactly, and he's of course moved on free to Birmingham, a very good player for Birmingham. Hopefully they can improve what has been a very poor season for them so far. And to wrap up our transfer chats, again, apologies for not going into too much detail. If we've missed your club, then be sure to shout them out in the comments and we'll talk about your transfer window. But are there any other teams in the January transfer window whose business has caught your eye?
I wasn't necessarily caught my eye, but maybe sort of lack of ambition is what I put it with Preston. I believe they're only one of 2 clubs, or I think of Rotherham. I'm sure the chat will correct me anyway, because I'm a Preston or Rotherham that haven't signed anybody this window, and I decided they needed to. They needed those reinforcements. So probably those who stood out for the wrong reasons, to be honest.
Yeah, and Leicester are the other team who didn't sign any players in the January window. Though there is the argument to be had over whether Leicester actually need any players, given the fact that they have kept hold of so many star players in the likes of Pereira, Vardy, obviously. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a miss of a window for Leicester, as I don't think they needed any players, but they did miss out on Sensi from Inter Milan as well. A real quick shout out for Plymouth Argyle as well. They've had a brilliant transfer window. Bought in Adam Forshaw on a free from Norwich. I've seen Forshaw quite a bit this season on TV, obviously. I don't go to Carrow Road to watch their games. But Forshaw, I reckon he still has the quality in him, especially for Plymouth. And they need that senior head at the moment, just kind of like galvanise the dressing room. Alfie Devine as well, brilliant young player from Spurs. Ashley Phillips as well, who is another lad on loan from Spurs as well. And Lino Sosa, along with some others as well. They've had a brilliant transfer window, in my opinion, and a very important one as well, because they did need kind of like a couple of players to bring in, given how much they lost in the transfer window as well. Ian Foster, he's a manager who's impressed me so far. I know they lost last night, but hopefully he can get a good run of games together and, yeah, keep them up, which is something I'm hoping to see. Anyway, we are now going to go on to the league table. We are going to discuss some other teams as well as the upcoming match day as well. Here is a peek at the league table. So at the moment in first place, obviously, is Leicester. We're expecting to see this kind of like stay, aren't we, Rhys?
Yeah, 100%. This is the best team, in my opinion, that we've ever seen in the Championship. There's no doubt they're going to absolutely destroy this points record. The points record was set by Reading in 2006 when they accumulated 106 points. And really looking from Leicester, you look at their sort of upcoming games, like Watford, Sheffield Wednesday, Middlesbrough, Leeds, and QPR. Leeds is the only one in that sort of next five that you're thinking maybe they're going to struggle. Any other team, I think, in the league, they're simply too good for. And I had a comment right at the top now about sort of parachute payments, and this really could be the first season that I can remember where the three teams that come down from the Premier League are going to be the three teams that will go straight back up. Because the difference in sort of with these parachute payments, it's too large. So this will be the first season for me where Leicester, Leeds, and Southampton will be the three teams going up.
And look, this is a conversation that is had every year, but do you reckon that the quality between the Championship and the Premier League is kind of like increasing? Do you reckon there's an increase in kind of like the quality gap between both leagues?
Yeah, there is 100%. We saw the likes of Burnley and Luton last season, who are fantastic in the Championship, have gone up and have really struggled. I know Luton, obviously, maybe last match they had a fantastic game against Newcastle, of course, but generally as the whole season they've been struggling. The gap with all these passions, it is too much. Something needs to happen, but these things we can sort of come on here and we can say that they need to change. But then the argument is, how do you change it?
A team, though, who have really been impressing me is Russell Martin's Southampton. They had a very difficult start to this season that we may be able to excuse because there is an argument to be had that Russell Martin was just finding his feet there. But they've been absolutely brilliant in the Championship recently. January the 13th, they beat Sheffield Wednesday at home 4-0. January the 20th, they went away from home to Swansea and beat them 3-1. And during their last game, they beat Rotherham 2-0 away from home. And the New York Stadium, in my opinion, has been a very difficult place for some of the bigger teams to go to. So Russell Martin's at Southampton, how impressed have you been with them lately?
They've been absolutely exceptional. And really, if you take sort of Leicester out of this league, if they don't exist, Southampton are the best team in the league for me. They really are. I think they've now broken the club's record in terms of games unbeaten. That have been stretched now to 21 games unbeaten. It's simply incredible what they're doing. Yes, they got one game in hand over leaders Leicester, but let's be honest, we're not going to expect anyone else but Leicester to win the league, are we? It'd be a stretch too far, really. And then again, you look at their upcoming games, Huddersfield and Bristol City. Let's be honest, that's going to go to 23 games unbeaten, really.
And shout out as well, because he isn't the top scorer in the Championship at the moment. We'll talk about the top scorer later on. But shout out to Adam Armstrong as well, who looked to be on his way out of Southampton during the summer, but has absolutely lit the Championship on fire. 15 goals so far this season. He's been an absolutely incredible player to watch. So let's go down to third in the league at the moment. And we're going to go on to Leeds United. There was the expectation, Rhys, that Leeds were going to struggle at the beginning of the season. But Daniel Farke has really galvanised Leeds United, and they've been absolutely brilliant as of late. Of course, in the FA Cup last night, in the replay, they beat Plymouth Argyle away from home 4-1. And in their last game in the Championship, they went away from home to a very difficult Bristol City side and won 1-0. So what do you make of Leeds United as of late?
The only sort of criticism that I had of Leeds sort of past months is just inconsistency. But it seems as if lately that they've absolutely made me look terrible, to be honest, because they've been absolutely exceptional. They've won all league games since the start of the year. They've been that good. They've only conceded one goal, and I think that was to Preston North End this year. Daniel Farke is really turning things around there. I know we've had, obviously this is ifs and maybes at this stage. We've had our sort of concerns about Daniel Farke managing in the Premier League, but with this squad, why can't it be a success? Why can't they go up and compete at the very, very least? Because they are capable of that. At home, we saw when Ipswich went there that if you give them the chances to really exploit you, they'll put you to the sword. It's simple that they really will. If they got a little bit of inconsistency out that does creep in at times, then really that second spot is still up for grabs.
And you look at the quality of their squad as well, and some of the young players that they have as well. A player who's really caught my eye is Ilya Gruev, who has forced his way into Daniel Farke's starting 11. He has started 5 of their 6 last league games, and he's a player who's really giving Daniel Farke a conundrum in regards to how they should shape their midfield. So they have a couple of really good young players as well, forcing their way into his side. And yeah, again, I'm really impressed with this Leeds United side. Ethan Ampadu and Joe Rodon. I had question marks over Ampadu at the beginning of the season, but since you were last on air, Ampadu, in my opinion, has proven himself to be one of the best young defenders in the Championship. And shout out to Wilfred Notto as well. His attitude maybe towards the beginning of last season was questionable. Him alongside with Sinisterra, who has left the club now, were kind of like trying to force their way out. But Notto, he's kept his head down and has proven himself to be a really valuable player for Leeds United. And I think he's been a real asset for them as well. Now on to fourth, and we've already spoken about them in a bit of detail earlier on, but Ipswich Town. Yeah, Ipswich, look, we need to be impartial when talking about them, but do you see automatics going out the window for them, especially given the quality of the teams above them?
I'm never going to sit here and rule anything out while it's still mathematically possible. We saw in our promotion season that from about mid-February through the season, we didn't lose a game. Our form was sensational, and that was in the end was what got us promoted. We went on an absolute rampage. But you've got 2 sides ahead of us, it's Southampton and Leeds, who, in my opinion, are Premier League ready. Their squads are ready for the Premier League. I've had this debate a lot down Portman Road, and the sort of bottom line with Ipswich in the Premier League is that if we go up this season, fantastic, we celebrate, of course we do. But the problem is that next season, you've got to find 3 worse teams than ourselves that would go down. And really, I think we'd finish rock bottom of the league. And then you're looking at your better players going, you're potentially looking at Kieran McKenna departing as well. And then you're in a mess when you come back down, and you've got so many sort of bows that you've got to tie up properly again. For me,
And
I've always said it. Go on, mate.
sorry for interrupting, but we play West Brom this weekend, a team who, under Carlos Corberán, in my opinion, have again been absolutely brilliant as of late. Do you see that maybe being a decider, if you will, as to whether Ipswich can stay competitive?
I would say the game itself is a decider, but I think it's a massive game in sort of knowing where our sort of level is at the moment. It seems to be since, and it's the one no time we're going to talk about it, that the Maidstone game, it seems to be that we've sort of fallen off a cliff a little bit. That's a problem with having these sort of cup games, is that you get one sort of shock result like that, the mentality goes, the confidence goes. I think it was evident in our game against Preston, the way we started. The opening 8 or 9 minutes to go 2-0 down in the sort of fashion that we did is simply not acceptable. So I wouldn't say it's a decider, but it's a massive game in knowing where we are. And West Brom, of course, have been absolutely fantastic at home. They've probably got the best home record in the league, but away from home, they have looked vulnerable. So potentially we could take advantage of that. But Carlos Corberán, a fantastic upcoming manager as well. It'll be a tough game.
And Ian Bradley, if Ipswich went up, would struggle to get 20 points, but hey, parachute payments. Yeah, it's interesting because we've seen how Luton have performed so far this season. And all I'm going to say is that anything is possible. But in my opinion, I'd be happy personally with the playoffs. We've already spoken about Hull in a bit of detail, so we won't talk about them. We're actually going to move on to Middlesbrough. Middlesbrough's League Cup defeat seems to destroy their confidence and their recent results. So let's talk about Middlesbrough a minute, because they've drawn their last 2 games. Michael Carrick's side are seemingly struggling at the moment. So what have you made of Middlesbrough as of late? You sit 12th in the league at the moment.
I'm not going to be too harsh on Middlesbrough, to be honest. I rate Michael Carrick as a coach. I do. We saw in the first leg of that League Cup, they picked up another 2 injuries. It was Josh Coburn again. So you're relying on on himself. Bangura, of course, got injured in that one as well. So there's a lot of things sort of going against them as well at that same time. What I will say at that point I just made about Ipswich and Maidstone is these cup games that come, yes, they're massive occasions, they're big occasions when you get the likes of Chelsea and get to go to Stamford Bridge, but it can knock momentum. It can change a season, and it's almost what we've seen in Middlesbrough now. Their season will probably sort of fade out into mid. That top four is cemented with those teams, and it's only 2 places left. And realistically, West Brom, Hull, Coventry, Sunderland, and Norwich are all in a better position really to get those last 2 spots.
And I'm surprised that they didn't cash in on the Morgan Rogers money, because they sold him to Aston Villa for around about 8 million. Okay, in the transfer window, they did bring in Finn Azaz for 2 million. He's a brilliant addition, by the way, and Luke Kaling as well. But I'm surprised that they didn't go out there to maybe get more higher profile players just so that they can stay competitive up there. But when you look at their squad at the moment and how much quality they still have, then yeah, I reckon that they could potentially find their form again. But it is worth noting, and I do want to ask you for your thoughts on this. Matt Crooks looks to be on his way out. He's allegedly, I say allegedly, this is according to reports, on his way to Real Salt Lake. In my opinion, he's been a very important player for them, very consistent, a lot of tenacity in midfield as well. What do you make of them selling Matt Crooks, especially at this stage of the season after the window has slammed shut?
I don't understand the timing, to be honest. If you're going to get rid of an important player in January, I think it's a mistake regardless. But to get rid of him at this point, when you haven't got the sort of time to replace, and when the season's sort of dwindling out as it is now for Middlesbrough, I don't see the sort of logic behind selling now, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's a bizarre one because okay, he wasn't that popular with the supporters, but like he is still a very experienced player, and especially at this stage of the season, I reckon he would have been invaluable for them. So personally, yeah, I'm absolutely baffled that they've for some reason decided to sell him, and I don't think they've sold him for that much either, which is a real shame really when you think about it. So Norwich City, they sit 9th at the moment, and I'm quickly going to bring up something that Ben Napper said in a press conference recently. He said that Norwich have the infrastructure to play in the Premier League and that they are Premier League ready. So when you look at Norwich, in the past, I think they've been a very well-run club. Their youth system is absolutely superb. The amount of talented young players that they've brought through is outstanding. But do you think Norwich fans will like Ben Napper coming out and saying this, especially since they have had issues off the field as of late?
Yeah, they definitely had their issues, and he sort of came out and tried to explain why he didn't get rid of David Wagner straight away, and said that he needed time regardless to do that anyway, which I thought was a little bit of a weird sort of thing to say, to be honest. But surely before you said he had this few months in before we actually came into position, so surely you're using those months to sort of in your head work out what your plan's going to be regarding the manager, so that when you come in, that period of thinking is sort of done, dusted, and then you make a decision when you come into post. Surely that's what you're going to do. But to come out and say that they're Premier League ready, I think that's. I'm trying, because everyone knows I'm an Ipswich fan as well. That's a ridiculous thing to say. In my opinion, it really is. Yes, on the field, if they keep the likes of Jonathan Rowe and Josh Sargent fit, Gabriel Sara stays in form, those players are going to be vital, and they may be able to sort of have a charge at top 6, but they're not Premier League ready now.
And I do reckon that David Wagner deserves credit for their recent improvements, because they have improved recently, and he has made some brilliant substitutions that have changed games. An example of that being their 2-1 win over Coventry. But the problem that I have is, and again, don't misconstrue this as a criticism, but their over-reliance on academy players, on young players as well. And in my opinion, that could potentially be a real pitfall for them as well, despite the fact that I do reckon he's done a brilliant job just introducing them and kind of embedding them into the side as well. But at the moment, they do sit ninth in the table at the moment. They could potentially jump into the playoffs with a couple of wins as well. Do you reckon they're another team who could potentially be dark horses for the playoffs?
Potentially. And I'm saying this as would any other team in their position. It's not just because I'm an Ipswich fan. I personally can't see them making the top six, to be honest. I think there's still too many ifs, buts, and perhaps with Norwich. I'm very, very rightly in the chat. Ian Bradley just says underneath that comment, defensively very suspect, and they're exactly that. They really are. I said at the time that when they announced the signing of Shane Duffy, it weren't one that I liked anyway. I didn't see the logic behind it, and I think he's been announced today as I'm being injured and he's pulled up again. Those sort of signs don't make sense to me because surely you're going to want younger players who are more energetic and can really put a sort of stamp on play. So for me, they're not going to make top six. I just think Coventry are in a better position than they are, despite that. Obviously, Norwich beat them.
Now, personally, I reckon that Norwich have a brilliant midfield, but again, I do agree with their defence. Shane Duffy and Ben Gibson, they are players who are getting on a bit. And Ben Gibson, I saw him play against Liverpool in the FA Cup. Okay, they were playing against Liverpool, one of the best teams in Europe. But, he did come across as a player who's very defensively suspect. But I do really like Angus Gunn in goal, and I liked him back to his days at Southampton. And he's kind of like taken after his own father, really. He's an absolute hero at Norwich. So I do reckon that mistake that they made was not kind of like improving defensively during the January transfer window. But at the same time, they do have plenty of brilliant players in their midfield as well as up front as well. Josh Sargent has really picked up his form as of late. Now, let's quickly go or have a look towards the bottom end of the table. We've spoken about Blackburn Rovers and Birmingham City, who occupy 18th and 19th at the moment. Let's talk about Stoke City, though, because they are a really interesting side to talk about. And I'd like everybody else in chat to give me their thoughts on Stoke as well. Steven Schumacher, absolutely brilliant manager, in my opinion, who did a brilliant job at Leicester. But he's had a difficult start to life at Stoke, losing 3-1 away from home at Sunderland and being battered 5-0 at home by a very strong Leicester City side. So what's gone wrong this season for Stoke? Because they have invested well despite where they are at the moment.
Yeah, they have invested well, and I do too. I like their sort of transfer policy that they have sort of gone with. For Steven Schumacher, it's the first time he's lost 3 straight league games and his heaviest defeat since his Plymouth side lost 4-0 to Leicester as well back in December. The problem is, I just wonder whether it's the wrong appointment for Schumacher, to be honest. I wasn't convinced when it was sort of announced. I thought maybe go to a team who are a bit more, quote unquote, sort of stable as well. I think we mentioned it, we talked about previous clubs as well, that perhaps off the field and in terms of the ownership and that sort of area of things at Stoke isn't the best as well. Perhaps he's a little bit of tweaking there as well. But Stoke, they're so sort of up and down. We saw how good they can be at the Bet365. We know they're a decent side when they want to be. But it seems to be that they go from having a great performance like they did in the 0-0 against us to then just dropping off the edge of a cliff.
And I think this is a very good comment right here from Ian. Nathan James regretted going to Stoke. Schumacher will too. And yeah, I agree. And the only problem that I have is that, okay, Stoke have invested well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their players have necessarily been good, that they've made good signings. Niall Ennis, in my opinion, look, He's a very good young player, brilliant for Plymouth in League One, but he didn't really do anything at Blackburn Rovers. And I reckon he's a very suspect signing, really. I know that Schumacher has a very good relationship with Niall Ennis and that he knows him well. He brought him over to Plymouth and he brought him to Stoke as well. But I don't necessarily think he's going to improve this Stoke City side. Vidigal as well. He's a player who look, he's a very good young player and there's plenty of potential in him as well, but he hasn't necessarily set the world alight despite his 5 goals already this season, which is a real concern in my opinion as well. And Wesley as well, we do need to mention him. He previously played for Aston Villa. He's made 1 appearance for Brazil, but he's been an absolutely abysmal signing for them. He hasn't made an impact at all. And I do kind of feel as though Stoke have tried to bring in some of these high-profile players, youngsters with really good reputations who haven't necessarily set the world alight. And that has been kind of like a real pitfall for them so far this season. But yeah, they're another team who are at the moment in danger of slipping into the relegation zone. We will also talk about, and Ballon, will we talk about League One and League Two today? How long is the live for? There is a stream immediately after this at 8:30, the Bundesliga live. So we will talk about League One and League Two in a bit more detail next week. We'll, of course, touch upon them in the questions as well. So many apologies for not talking about those 2 leagues in more detail. They'll be our main focus next week. So quickly before we do go on to the questions, Huddersfield at the moment, they are in 21st. Do you reckon that they'll get the new manager bounce once they do bring somebody in?
Well, we talk about this sort of this managerial bounce that seems to happen with teams, but you can say yes, okay, they may start to get their performances up, but then you look at the fixture list. It's so tough. We got like to Southampton, Sunderland, Hull, Watford, Leeds. They're all tough games, and then you ask me the question: is the sort of team good enough? Probably not for me, to be honest. With Rotherham and Sheffield Wednesday, they're probably 2 teams for me that are probably already relegated. To be honest, I know it's February and things are going to change. Of course they are, but I think Rotherham and Wednesday are probably down as we talk, and it's going to be out of Huddersfield and QPR to me to see who stays up.
I do quite like Rotherham though, because like there have been players who I've really rated so far this season, such as Cafu in midfield. Like he's been like a proper old-fashioned player, like diving into every tackle. He is prone to his odd card, and I'm sure Ian Bradley can kind of like enlighten us in the chat. But Rotherham, they are good at upsetting some of the bigger teams, and I do reckon that is where some of their points will come from. But Huddersfield, I don't know. Like, I reckon they're too one-dimensional, and under Darren Moore, they were too one-dimensional as well, relying on set pieces too much and simply being very predictable, which you don't really want to be when you're in the position that they are at the moment. So I am concerned about where they are, and I am looking for the managerial odds at the moment in regards to who their next manager will be. I just found it. Michael Duff, former Barnsley manager, he is currently favourites to take over, with Paul Heckingbottom also linked to the club. Michael Duff, Paul Heckingbottom, do you reckon that they could maybe change their fortunes?
Potentially, but you're looking at all those teams sort of because from sort of Sheffield Wednesday up, shall we say, you're going to need results now, aren't you? So you're going to need a sort of big name in there that's going to really turn things around straight away, to be honest. And there's a question of, is Michael Duff, would probably be my pick, to be honest. But is he actually going to be able to get in there and change things from the get-go, which is what they need?
Ian Bradley, Cafu is ranked, but we do have the best goalkeeper outside the Premier League in Victor Johansson. So, yeah, I mean, Sheffield Wednesday and Rotherham, there's not really much to talk about in regards to them, as we've already spoken about them already in the show. But yeah, I guess the next thing to do is go on to the questions. As always, if you have any questions, then head over to YouTube if you are watching over on Twitter. And thank you very much to everybody who's joined us here tonight. We do appreciate you all. Next week, we will be talking about League One and League Two in a bit more detail. So many apologies for not talking about them tonight. But yeah, let's head over to the questions. And I'm sure there are some League One and League Two questions in there as well. Balaam, do you think Crystal Palace of Southeast London should have signed Sammy Smodics instead? He has been scoring goals. So I forgot to talk about this earlier on, but I wanted to give a shout out to Morgan Whittaker, as he's been an absolutely brilliant signing for Plymouth. He's the top scorer in the Championship at the moment. But a player who's joint top scorer at the moment in the Championship is Sammy Smodics. So do you reckon that Crystal Palace should have sold him? And how big a coup is it that Blackburn have managed to keep him?
It's an absolute massive sort of weapon in their armory, if you like. Sammy Waddicks is someone that I wanted to go for, to be honest, as well. He just signed that new term contract as well. I think it's 4 years now, that new contract. So if Palace went for him, you're also going to be talking mega money as well. You got the fact that really he's more of a number 10 playing in the number 9 because of the situation at Blackburn as well. So he isn't really a natural sort of leading the line, if you like. I don't follow the Premier League closely enough to know if Crystal Palace would need sort of a number 10. But for me, if you're after him for the number 9, then he's not the man.
And good evening to Lee Simons in the chat as well, former We Follow the Town alumni. Balaam, how do you think Chesterfield will do next season? Who do you think will go up with them, or is it truly anyone who will go up in the playoffs? So Paul Cook's Chesterfield, what have you made of them? Because I reckon Paul Cook has been absolutely brilliant at Chesterfield, and a player who I do rate, or did rate, as I'm not actually sure whether he's still there. Many apologies about my poor knowledge. Well, he is still there. A player who I do rate, who is there, is Armando Dobra. So what have you made of Chesterfield?
I've not really sort of followed Chesterfield too closely, to be perfectly honest with you. But the job that Paul Cook has been doing there has been fantastic. Look, when he moved into the sort of Championship, League One job that we had here, it's a job that was simply too big. It wasn't his sort of level, but now he sort of found a club in which he can sort of strive at. We're really sort of seeing the sort of quality that Paul Cook as a coach does possess.
And he is a coach who personally I do rate, and I think for him he needed to find the right club, and a club that would give him plenty of time, that would kind of like allow him to kind of like play around with the squad, maybe give him a season, if that makes sense. But at the moment there is an absolutely ridiculous gap at the moment of 22 points between them and second place Bromley. They have a goal difference of 41 at the moment, which is absolutely insane, and a couple of players who've really stood out for me so far this season for this Chesterfield side include the likes of Tom Naylor, who's been an absolutely brilliant signing for them. Darren Aldiker, former Peterborough youth player, who, again, he's been absolutely sensational for them as well. And Will Grigg, who, again, he isn't the player that he once was, but he's still a very useful player and he still contributes enormously to this side. In regards to teams I reckon will go up with them, I reckon Altrincham could do, especially given their recent run of form. They've been playing some brilliant football as well. And this is a difficult one because it's either for me between Solihull Moors and Barnet. They personally, I reckon it could be Solihull Moors maybe. So they're another team who I reckon could potentially go up with them. There's a very difficult kind of like league to tell. So again, we're not Vanarama National League experts. So sorry for absolutely butchering that if I did. Do you reckon Leicester, Leeds, and Southampton will all go up because of parachute payments? I think we've already answered that one. I reckon we've all come to the conclusion that they probably will, and we hate saying that as Ipswich Town fans, don't we? How did Rhys celebrate and watch transfer deadline day? Did you see how Leicester failed to sign Sensi from Inter Milan? Yeah, we did. We spoke about that earlier on, and I was surprised about that because Leicester do have a fair bit of money, don't they? But did you watch transfer deadline day?
Well, the short answer to that is I cannot stand it's watching sort of transfer deadline day, all the rumours that go around. So as soon as it was confirmed that we brought in Kiefer Moore on loan, then Twitter was turned off, TV was off, and I was done for the day. To be honest, I just can't stand dead on day, especially when we're trying to look over the sort of championship, both Leagues One and League Two, trying to keep an eye on everything that's going on. Personally, I don't bother watching the Sky.
I love it. I told my girlfriend I was ill just because it was on. I sat on the sofa watching it all evening. Absolutely love it. And the coverage as well, which is always, for some reason, absolutely ridiculous. I swear the pundits were playing darts at one point, which doesn't really make much sense. Thoughts on the second match between AFC Wimbledon and Milton Keynes? Thoughts on Troy Deeney's brief time at Forest Green? So first of all, Troy Deeney's brief time at Forest Green. Now, I will say that as a pundit, Troy Deeney is very well spoken. I reckon he's intelligent. I reckon he has got potential as a manager. But the way he conducted himself at Forest Green, in my opinion, was absolutely appalling, if I'm not exaggerating. So what did you make of Troy Deeney's time at Forest Green Rovers?
Goodness me, it was something else, really, wasn't it? When you're calling out individual players and absolutely slandering them, saying they wouldn't get a game in any league, and saying that there's a lack of care and coming out, how is any of this going to improve stuff on the pitch? By all means, if you want to say this stuff behind closed doors, go for it. You know, there's a way to conduct yourself. But to drag players sort of into the media and to absolutely rip them to shreds, and the guy's name has gone out my mind now, but obviously he missed the penalty, didn't he, in the
Dabo.
playoff final. Perfect. I knew that. Dabo. And to call him out is just absolutely ridiculous. How is any of that going to sort of result in getting the right performances and the right performances on the pitch? It's just not going to work.
Yeah, and again, like I reckon the mistake that he made was he didn't necessarily have any mature heads around him. He needed that manager who had maybe been there and done that. And I'm thinking for some reason of maybe like a John Still, for example, a veteran manager who's getting on a bit but might maybe be happy to take on an assistant manager role. And I reckon that's the one mistake that he kind of had, was not maybe having the experience next to him. Because look, you do learn, and you'll never learn without making these mistakes. And I reckon he will eventually become a good manager, simply because I've heard him talk before. And I reckon if he maybe put his head down, improved his conduct, maybe looked at what went wrong at Forest Green Rovers, whether it was the right job for him, whether he maybe could have dealt with some internal conflicts internally, if you will, then maybe he will bounce back. But yeah, I mean, that was an absolutely disastrous spell for him. And Forest Green, I mean, if I can say this, and it's funny considering how well they were doing 2 seasons ago in League Two, but I reckon they're as good as done. And thoughts on the second match between AFC Wimbledon and Milton Keynes. So these two teams play on the 2nd of March. It is a Mike Williamson who's done an absolutely brilliant job, in my opinion, at the MK Dons. Maybe that's just my soft spot showing through for Mike Williamson, because I thought he did a very good job at Gateshead against Johnny Jackson, who is another young manager who I really do rate, who's sitting 9th at the moment with AFC Wimbledon in the league table. That game, obviously, I hope that AFC Wimbledon win that game, because, and again, we need to be impartial on this show, but I'm not the biggest MK Dons fan, despite my affinity towards Mike Williamson. They did win 3-1 on January the 23rd, I remember. And that was kind of like due to 2 red cards from AFC Wimbledon, which was absolutely pandemonium. But look, the 3 goals did come before those 2 red cards. So, the game was already over at that point. But AFC Wimbledon at home, they're different beasts, in my opinion, and they'll bring it to Milton Keynes. So that is a game that I'm really looking forward to as well. Do you reckon Sutton can stay up? Thoughts on Nathan Jones for Charlton? So we'll stick to the Charlton one. We'll talk about Sutton United in a bit more detail next week. Nathan Jones to Charlton. So that is a really interesting one in my opinion, because Nathan Jones at Luton, I reckon he did a brilliant job, and he built the foundations for how well they're doing at the moment in the Premier League, galvanising the squad together, and he's more or less built what Rob Edwards has at the moment. The only problem that I have with Charlton is their ownership, and the fact that their ownership has been a little finicky in the past. Nathan Jones, he did a very bad job. Whether you can say it was his fault or not, that is up to debate at Southampton. But Nathan Jones to Charlton, Rhys, what do you make of that?
I was quite surprised when I had a look at the league table and saw where Charlton were, to be honest. So I sort of switched off from football and sort of focused on other things I had going on. And to see them sort of towards the bottom end of the table, I had to sort of double look and sort of look into what's going wrong there. I'm not saying that they're going to go down. They shouldn't even be looking at going down, to be honest. But when it comes to these managers like Nathan Jones, you've just got to give him time. You have to. You mentioned it there with Lincoln. You built foundations and then left. So it's the same thing as what happened on Wednesday in Danny Rule. These foundations have to be put in place properly, and there must be time.
And don't forget to give Ian Bradley's Matchday vlogs a look at. They are on YouTube, on our YouTube page. Obviously, I absolutely butchered that. Apologies, Ian. But he does do brilliant match day vlogs. But yeah, I mean, I reckon he could do a good job, Nathan Jones, only if he's given time. The problem that I have with him is that he hasn't necessarily stayed in the same place in the last couple of years for that long. And I do question his loyalty as well, as if he sees a bigger opportunity, he will take it. But hey, he's a football manager. He has to take these opportunities. I'm just reading through the comments. Ian Bradley, ban all betting advertising from EFL, as simple as that. Rebecca Mason, I worked for Ladbrokes. Betting is a very grey area. It is an addiction that no one really wants to talk about. Banning someone for doing something they love doing for 4 months is awful. Give them advice and support. And I reckon that sums it up better than I can, really, because it's a grey area in football, really, because we do kind of like see when the fun stops, stop kind of like things after betting adverts, which are on screen for about a second, but they don't really help with anything. And so many young people are attracted by these fun betting adverts, if you will. And if you look behind me at the moment, there's a shirt right there with a betting advert kind of like on in the middle of it. And I do reckon that it's very difficult to get away of. And gambling is a big source for the government's income, and I reckon the government have to kind of like be the source of kind of like stamping it out, as I reckon the FA won't do it. And if they won't do it, the government have to do something. But yeah, what do you think of that comment? And it's hard to disagree with, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely bang on. The problem is all day today, whenever there's football on, I'm getting 2 or 3 texts a day from Bet365 saying bet X amount, you get X amount in free bets. So even if you're not going on these apps, you're getting texts when you sign up. There's not enough sort of restrictions. Talk about the mobile side for a second. there's not enough restrictions on sort of limits, or you can only deposit so much, and then they won't let you. You can adjust all these. So yes, you can have a limit on. Then you just text them or do a live chat, and it gets taken off. So there isn't enough sort of helping around, and I totally agree. There needs to be advice and support, 110%. But the problem is, if it was very much outside the Premier League, that the FA sort of look over everything. So I've got no doubt that probably lots of Ivan Toney probably received help. But I look at, this isn't my opinion, looking at Blackburn Rovers as a sort of smaller club and going, oh, they'll be fine, we'll sort of leave it. But the problem is that these players and anyone that has any television should be getting help. That has to be the first protocol.
And of course, this does go without saying, because sometimes when we talk about, like betting odds and things like that, we do of course take those sources from the likes of Sky Bets. Though if you do need any help with gambling and you need support, then of course there are places to go. BeGambleAware.org is a fantastic support network for that as well. So an interesting question right here that I've completely lost for some reason. So Dan Green, yes. Thoughts on the EFL not pressing send on an email and the EFL statement about it as well. So I'll quickly read through their statement. Blackburn Rovers have been unsuccessful in its attempts to sign Duncan Maguire on loan from MLS side Orlando City. A deal had been agreed between the two clubs on February the 1st for the player to join Rovers on loan until the end of the season, with a view for making it permanent. Despite all relevant paperwork being completed and uploaded onto the system in good time, the signed registration documents were not submitted prior to the 11 o'clock deadline. A meeting was held earlier today, and the EFL board has upheld the decision for the application. And this was, of course, done with a comprehensive review as well. And Duncan Maguire, who was slated to either join Sheffield Wednesday or Blackburn, will now return to Orlando at the earliest opportunity. A long old journey back. So again, we spoke about it a little bit earlier on, but what do you make of the EFL's statement, and what do you make of the whole ordeal and how it was dealt with?
Well, look, rules around submitting paperwork are the rules, and you can't just sort of go, they've said it, let's do a deal. That just can't happen. So of course, EFL are right in what they've done in this instance. But as a player that really misses out here, and Maguire was away in Cancun, I believe, or somewhere in Mexico. So to have your holiday cut short, to be on a plane for goodness knows how many hours, and then to get halfway across, knowing that it's then fallen through. So you think, okay, well, we'll turn around eventually. So then there's then a loan deal that could potentially go through. So then you land in England thinking, right, okay, I'll get my move anyway. And it's so on and off. And like I said earlier, if this is the sort of standards that Blackburn are sort of holding themselves against, then it's an absolute joke.
And there are so many questions in chat. Thank you so much for putting them through. A very interesting chat about parachute payments as well. I'm just going to read through. Apologies for the Dark Side Phil-esque quietness on my end. Just reading through.
There was a comment a little bit further up talking about AFC Wimbledon and how much better they've been this season, and that's a great shout. I think it was Ian Bradley, correct me if I'm wrong. So a little bit of a follow-up to that, imagine that me asking you a question, is how much will they miss Ali Al-Hamadi? Obviously, he was fantastic in what he's done there. Ali destroyed League Two, went up to the Asian Cup, and is now coming up to Ipswich. So I'm wondering how much of a hole he's going to leave in sort of their squad and their sort of league position now, to be honest.
Now, I remember him back when he was at Wickham. And when he was at Wickham, he was a very raw talent. He wasn't necessarily ready for first-team football back then. But he's blossomed into a really important player for AFC Wimbledon. A player who, can hold up the ball, has plenty of pace as well, and has a really brilliant first touch. So, yeah, I mean, Ali El Hamadi is going to be a real miss for AFC Wimbledon. He scored 23 goals and 42 appearances for them, and he was more than a forward, in my opinion. He was a player who could hold the ball up, bring others into play as well, and he was a defender's worst nightmare. And he will be an absolute miss for AFC Wimbledon, because he was kind of like their star man. He was a player who they did develop as well, especially given where he had come from at Wickham. I do worry about where the goals will come from at AFC Wimbledon. Look, Josh Kelly is a brilliant player up front. He's still very young, though. Omar Bogle as well, 30 years old. He does provide the experience. But I don't necessarily know whether they can supply AFC Wimbledon with the same amount of impetus that El Hamadi kind of like injected into the squad, if that makes sense. Brilliant signing for Ipswich, though, and I'm sure McKenna will integrate him into the side. Not immediately, as we do have Kiefer Moore, but he is a player for the future as well. Do you think Reading will do the unthinkable? And final 3 questions, by the way, because we are running quite long tonight. But do you reckon Reading will do the unthinkable and go down to League Two? We are in the middle of February and the business end of the season now. So one of my grandparents growing up was a Reading fan. And my first ever game was actually at Ipswich when I was about, 4 years old. But I did go to a couple of Reading games as well with my grandfather, and I always enjoyed going there. And it's a real shame to see where they are at the moment, because John Medeski has to be rolling in his grave at the moment. But Rhys, do you reckon they'll do the unthinkable and go down to League Two?
First and foremost, they're too big of a club to be in League One for me. And the fact we've been talking about the possibility of them going down to League Two just shows the incompetence of the EFL to allow Dai Young to even be there and still be in sort of forefront of the club, and to just add more fines to his pocket that he's going to ignore is an absolute joke of a punishment for me. Looking at the league table, you've got Port Vale just beneath them, got 2 games in hand. Realistically, all I need to get is 1 point from that and a couple more goals and goal difference, and Reading are in trouble. It's crazy to think that they could even in the conversation to be in League Two next season, and I hope they're not, but I do worry about them.
And the Bundesliga show does follow us after this, so be sure to head over to their live chat to get involved. One final question. And I'll talk about Reading in a bit more detail next week, because I have plenty to talk about in regards to them. But why do you think Wayne Rooney's time went so bad? So many defeats in his time and everything. Yeah, we won. I don't think we were recording when he got the sack. But yeah, and I'll ask you this first, but what do you make of Wayne Rooney's stint at Birmingham?
Well, from a neutral point of view, watching Birmingham, it was a little bit comical, to be honest. I mean, that with no disrespect to any Birmingham fans, if you have any in the chat right now. It was a mixture of 2 sort of big factors, to be honest, there. I thought he's coming with his own sort of style and was focusing on that instead of focusing on the players that he had there and playing to their strengths. He was ignoring what the players' sort of attributes were and sticking to his own philosophy. That, when you're not in a transfer window, is a very risky sort of game to play, and that sort of backfired as well. Not in that, but in the MLS, he wasn't exactly pulling down trees, was he? He wasn't exactly, achievements after achievements. So to go into this job, I was a bit surprised, to be honest. It was certainly just to get him in as a big name, to draw national attention and to get him in. And like I say, now they've got a massive game against Blackburn coming up. And if Blackburn can beat them, then Birmingham are in world trouble.
I'm going to be really blunt here. I simply don't think that Wayne Rooney is a good enough manager, really. And look, I know as 2 people hosting an EFL podcast, maybe we should be a little more analytical. But I simply don't think he was good enough at Derby. He didn't do a good job at all, in my opinion. At DC United, he was abysmal there as well. Not popular with their fan base as well. Though we did get Christian Benteke scoring with all players. And at Birmingham, they signed him simply because of his name, simply because he is the legendary Wayne Rooney. Everybody knows his name. He's an English football legend. And I think if you're Tom Brady, and I know he's not the outright owner there, so he probably didn't have the final say. But I know for the likes of Tom Brady, you're probably thinking that you can do what you can do in American football and bring in the big names. That does more often than not in American football translate well onto the pitch. And it doesn't work in English football, unfortunately. Both games are very tactical, but Wayne Rooney hasn't proven himself to be a good manager at all. I reckon he was tactically inept at Birmingham. It wasn't necessarily his fault because he was bought into the side and he was offered the contract. And if I was Rooney, I would have taken it anyway. But I simply think it was such a poor decision for Tom Brady and co to bring in Rooney that in hindsight, it was never really going to work. And I think a lot of people kind of like saw the potential for Rooney to fail early on. And ultimately, he did fail. He was absolutely shocking. And unfortunately, one of the rare points that he did pick up at Birmingham was against Ipswich. As the old saying goes, then along came Ipswich. But yeah, it was always going to fail, in my opinion. And I don't think he's a manager with a real future in the game unless he goes down to League Two and try something at Forest Green Rovers, for example.
Well, would you put Wayne Rooney? Sorry, mate. Would you put Wayne Rooney in the same category as Troy Deeney in the fact that the reputation's taken a massive, massive dent now, and for any club in the pyramid to take either manager on, it's going to be a massive risk.
You see, Troy Deeney hasn't, like Rooney has had, experience in the past. Like at Everton, I think he had a coaching role there. Derby, DC United. So he has been there and done that. But I think Rooney kind of had a bit more experience. So I do genuinely reckon it was the beginning of the end for Rooney when he started calling out his own players. Because, he did call out players during the end of his tenure, and he complained about needing to make 11 substitutions, which if you're a manager you shouldn't really be saying at all, in my opinion, because you should really be taking a bit more responsibility. And I know the squad weren't that good or weren't playing that well, but you should really be taking a bit more responsibility. So Rooney did make a very similar mistake that Deeney made. But Deeney, I reckon, was a lot more blunt. He didn't butcher his words in the media when talking about Fankety Dapo. So I reckon there are similarities. But I forgot your question. Sorry about that. But who's worse? Troy Deeney, in my opinion. But I do rate him as a pundit. But yeah, there are a lot of similarities between both of them. Real quickly, who do you reckon is the worst manager? Troy Deeney or Wayne Rooney?
Very quickly, in a word, Wayne Rooney.
I don't know. It's difficult. I almost contradicted my own opinion there, but we could be having this debate for hours. And let us know down below in the comments if you're watching on repeat over on YouTube or in the live chat at the moment, who you think is the worst manager. I never like saying the worst manager, but the least successful manager, maybe Wayne Rooney or Troy Deeney. But anyway, that is the end of the show. I'm trying to get up our plugs right here. Okay, just found them. I'm going to get it right this time, I swear. You can visit us at www.otbfootball.net or visit us on Twitter at overthebarfb. And of course, if you're watching this live over on Twitter at the moment, you can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/overthebarfb. And of course, if you're following us on X, I still call it Twitter, then you can find us at overthebarfb as well. Rhys, where can they find you on Twitter?
If you want to debate, my username should be, always gets wrong, about here somewhere at RhysCurtis14.
And you can find me at OTB_ Benjamin as well. Again, thank you very much to everybody else in the chat as well. I'm delighted that you've all joined us tonight. We will be talking about League One and League Two in a bit more detail next week. I'm mainly vamping on because I can't find the outro. I found it. I'll see you all next week.